My husband's mother thought she inherited my estate until I showed the final will. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. My husband was in the ground for less than 2 hours when his mother handed me empty moving boxes. I was still wearing my black funeral dress, standing in the foyer of the home Greg and I had shared for 5 years. The scent of lilies and cold rain still clung to my heavy wool coat. I stared at the flattened cardboard in Beatrice's perfectly manicured hands, my brain too fogged by fresh grief to comprehend what was happening. "It's best you get a head start, Clara," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with that familiar, syrupy condescension. "Greg's estate will need to be liquidated, of course. I know you'll want to find a nice little apartment before the bank gets involved. Have you ever watched someone dig their own grave with a silver spoon? Because that is exactly what my mother-in-law was doing. She honestly believed that the sprawling, 6-bedroom estate we lived in belonged to her golden boy son. She believed that I, a woman who preferred jeans to Chanel and worked quietly from a home office, was just a lucky charity case Greg had taken pity on. The truth? I own a highly successful cybersecurity startup. I bought this house in cash a year before I even met Greg. But Beatrice never bothered to learn what my little computer hobbies actually entailed. To her, Greg was the high-powered financial consultant, the sole breadwinner, the king of the castle. In reality, Greg was charming, handsome, and absolutely terrible with money. But I loved him, or at least the man I thought he was. I let him play the big shot. I never corrected his mother when she praised him for providing such a beautiful home for me. I didn't care about the credit. I just wanted peace. But looking at Beatrice now, flanked by my sister-in-law Chloe, who was already eyeing my antique hall mirror, the illusion shattered. They weren't just mourning, they were pillaging. My husband's body was barely cold, and the vultures were circling, ready to pick my bones clean. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach as Chloe whispered something to her mother and pointed toward the living room. They were already dividing up my entire life. I realized this was only the beginning of a brutal war. Our entire marriage had been an exercise in biting my tongue. Beatrice never missed an opportunity to remind me of my place. I remember our first Thanksgiving in this house. She walked into the custom chef's kitchen, ran a finger over the marble countertops, and sighed. "Greg always did have exquisite taste," she said loudly to Chloe. "It's so generous of him to let Clara play house in a place like this." Most girls with her background would be intimidated. My background. My father was an accountant and my mother was a teacher. We weren't old money, but we were smart with it. I started my company at 23 and sold my first patent at 27. But to Beatrice, if it wasn't inherited wealth or a flashy Wall Street title, it didn't count. Greg, for his part, just smiled that dazzling, apologetic smile of his and squeezed my hand under the table. "Clara does all right, Mom," he had mumbled. That was his defense. She does all right. He never explicitly lied to them, but he bathed in the glow of their assumptions. He let them believe his consulting firm paid for the vacations to Aspen, the twin Mercedes in the driveway, and the private club memberships. In reality, Greg's firm had been floundering for years. He brought in just enough to cover his own expensive wardrobe and dinners out with clients. I paid the mortgage. I paid the property taxes. I paid the utility bills. I funded our life because I could easily afford it, and I loved him enough to protect his fragile ego. But it meant I had to endure Chloe asking me if I needed a loan for a decent dress before family events, or Beatrice suggesting I take a part-time job at a boutique so I wouldn't be such a financial burden on her son. I swallowed the insults, choosing harmony over being right. I thought my silence was an act of love. Now, standing in my foyer with moving boxes shoved against my chest, I realized my silence had been a terrible mistake. It had emboldened them. Beatrice adjusted her pearl necklace and gave me a tight, sympathetic smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. "I know it's hard, dear, but Greg wouldn't want you squatting in a house you simply cannot afford." She actually reached out and patted my cheek. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself from screaming. I knew I needed to get them out of my house immediately. Greg's death was as sudden as it was devastating. A massive heart attack at the age of 35 while on a golf course. One minute I was planning our anniversary dinner, and the next, I was identifying his body at the hospital. The shock was absolute. For the first few days, I was a ghost haunting my own hallways. I barely ate, barely slept, just stared at his empty side of the closet. I thought Beatrice and I would share this grief. I thought losing the man we both loved would bridge the bitter gap between us. I was incredibly naive. Before the dirt even settled on his grave, the true nature of my in-laws was laid bare. While I was upstairs trying to find the strength to wash my face after the funeral, I heard the distinct sound of crystal clinking. I walked down the grand staircase to find Chloe in my dining room, casually wrapping my baccarat wine glasses in newspaper. Beatrice was in the living room, holding a clipboard, literally taking inventory of my artwork. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice raspy and hollow. Chloe didn't even look up. "Mom wants to make sure the estate is properly cataloged before things start. Going missing," she said pointedly. I was too numb to fight back. The grief was a heavy, wet blanket over my brain, making every thought sluggish and disconnected. "This is my house," I managed to whisper. Beatrice scoffed, checking something off on her clipboard. "Oh, Clara. Denial is a normal stage of grief, but let's be practical. We all know Greg bought this place. We just need to assess the assets so we can handle his final expenses. It's what he would have wanted." She spoke to me like I was a slow child. I wanted to scream that my name was the only one on the deed, that I had paid for every single piece of furniture they were eyeing, but the words wouldn't come. My chest physically ached from the loss of my husband, and their callous greed was just too much to process in that moment. I retreated upstairs, locking my bedroom door and sliding down to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably into my hands. They were trying to erase me from his life entirely. I heard them laughing downstairs, completely unbothered by my profound suffering. The true audacity arrived 3 days later via certified mail, though Beatrice practically delivered it herself. She marched past my housekeeper, Chloe trailing behind her like an eager puppy, and slammed a thick manila folder onto my kitchen island. "Read it and weep, as they say," Beatrice announced cheerfully. I stared at the folder, my coffee turning cold in my hands. Inside was a legal document. It looked official enough at first glance. Thick paper, blue ink signatures, a notary stamp from a state we hadn't visited in years. It was dated 5 years ago, right before our wedding. According to this supposed last will and testament, Greg left his entire estate, including his primary residence and all financial assets, to his beloved mother, Beatrice. I read the words, feeling a mix of confusion and rising anger. He wanted to ensure his family was protected, Beatrice said, puffing out her chest. He knew you had your little computer business to fall back on, but his true legacy belongs to us. Along with the questionable will, she handed me a formally typed piece of paper. It was a 30-day eviction notice. "I'm giving you a month to pack up your personal clothing and whatever trinkets you brought into the marriage," Beatrice dictated, her tone icy and authoritative. "After that, Chloe will be moving in to prepare the house for sale. We don't want you dragging down the property value." I looked at the eviction notice, then at the supposedly legal will. The signature looked like Greg's, but the date was entirely wrong. We hadn't even discussed wills until after we were married, and we used my corporate lawyer for everything. This document was either forged, or it was an obsolete relic from his bachelor days that Beatrice had kept locked in a vault, waiting for an opportunity. The fog of my grief began to burn away, replaced by a white-hot, terrifying clarity. They weren't just being insensitive, they were trying to legally rob me. "You have 30 days, Clara," Chloe chimed in, smirking. "Don't make us call the police to escort you off our property." I didn't cry this time. A strange, dangerous calm washed over my entire body. I knew exactly what my next move had to be. The moment their car pulled out of my driveway, I went straight to Greg's home office. It was the one room in the house I rarely entered. He called it his man cave, a place for his consulting work and late-night calls. The door was locked, but I knew where he kept the spare key hidden behind a framed photo in the hallway. I unlocked the door and stepped into the heavy scent of his expensive cologne. I wasn't looking for memories. I was looking for answers. I opened his laptop, bypassing the password easily. It was his mother's birthday, pathetic but convenient. Then, I tackled the small digital safe tucked into the bottom drawer of his mahogany desk. It took me 3 tries to guess the code. Inside, I didn't find the neat, organized financial portfolio I expected. I found chaos. My hands began to shake as I pulled out stack after stack of hidden bank statements, past due notices, and collection letters. There were credit cards I had never seen before, maxed out to the absolute limit. There were statements from high-interest personal loans, payday lenders, and offshore betting accounts. Greg wasn't just bad with money. He was drowning in a bottomless ocean of debt. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the paper evidence of my husband's secret life. The balances were staggering. 50,000 here, 80,000 there. He owed a massive balloon payment on a business loan he took out 3 years ago, a loan he claimed his firm was using to expand. But the bank statements told a different story entirely. There were no business expenses. There were only massive cash withdrawals and wire transfers to a single, recurring account number. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I traced the transfers. The financial ruin was worse than I could have ever imagined in my darkest nightmares. The man I married had been living a lie, a carefully constructed illusion funded by borrowed time and borrowed money. But as I dug deeper into the wire transfer receipts, my shock morphed into absolute fury. I finally realized exactly where all of Greg's borrowed money had been going. I cross-referenced the routing number from Greg's wire transfers with a digital file I found on his desktop labeled taxes_old. It didn't take a cybersecurity expert to crack this puzzle. The account receiving the tens of thousands of dollars belonged to Beatrice. My husband had been systematically siphoning money from high-interest, predatory loans to fund his mother's lavish lifestyle. The country club dues, the first-class flights to Europe, the designer handbags Chloe paraded around at family dinners. I hadn't paid for them, but Greg hadn't either. He had borrowed against his own future to keep up the charade that he was a wealthy, successful son providing for his regal mother. He was literally bankrupting himself to buy her love and approval, and she was more than happy to bleed him dry. The betrayal cut deeper than his death. He had lied to my face every single day. He let me fund our entire domestic life, the mortgage, the food, the cars, so his own income could be secretly diverted to Beatrice to maintain her arrogant delusions. I found emails between them. "Thanks for the deposit, darling," Beatrice wrote in one message from last year. "Chloe needs a new car for her promotion, and you know how she hates driving domestic. Make sure Clara doesn't see this. You know how stingy she gets." Stingy. I was paying for the roof over her son's head while she called me stingy. He was taking out loans with 20% interest rates just to buy his sister a BMW, and they were laughing behind my back. My husband was a coward, and his mother was a parasite. The sheer scale of the deceit was breathtaking. I sat in his office until the sun went down, the room growing dark around me, illuminated only by the glowing laptop screen showing their treacherous emails. They had treated me like a naive ATM. They thought they had outsmarted the quiet, unassuming wife. They thought they held all the cards. I slowly closed the laptop, a cold, calculated smile touching my lips for the first time since Greg passed. I was about to teach them a devastating lesson. The next morning, I drove into the city to meet with lawyer Marcus. Marcus is a senior partner at a top corporate firm, a man in his 50s with sharp eyes, a tailored suit, and absolutely zero tolerance for nonsense. He had handled the incorporation of my startup and my private estate planning. I walked into his sterile, high-end office and dumped the entire contents of Greg's safe onto his glass desk. "I need to destroy her," I said simply. Marcus raised an eyebrow, adjusting his silver-rimmed glasses as he sifted through the mountain of debt notices, forged will copies, and Beatrice's emails. I explained the eviction notice, the fake will, and the massive loans Greg had taken out to fund his mother's lifestyle. Marcus listened in total silence, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he picked up the last will and testament Beatrice had given me and examined the signature. "It's an old draft from before your marriage," Marcus confirmed, his voice smooth and precise. "Legally, it was revoked the moment he married you, even without a new will. But the beauty is, we do have a new will. The one we drafted 3 years ago." He pulled my actual file from his secure cabinet. "Furthermore, Clara, the house, the cars, the startup, your investment portfolios, they are all held in a single-member LLC or under your sole proprietorship. Greg's name isn't on a single deed." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Your mother-in-law is trying to claim an estate that literally does not exist." Then, Marcus looked at the stack of loan documents and a wicked glint appeared in his eye. "Wait," he murmured, pulling out a specific promissory note for a massive $150,000 personal loan Greg took out. "Look at the guarantor line." I leaned in. Right below Greg's signature was a second signature. "Beatrice, She had co-signed the biggest, ugliest loans to get them approved. Marcus looked up at me, a wolfish smile spreading across his face. He outlined a brilliant, devastating legal trap that would give them exactly what they asked for. I agreed immediately, ready to set the bait. To spring the trap, I had to play the part they expected, the weak, defeated widow. I drove back to my house and immediately texted Beatrice. "I don't want to fight," I wrote. "You can come over and start sorting through Greg's things. I'll stay out of your way." It made me physically ill to send it, but it was necessary. Less than an hour later, Beatrice and Chloe arrived, practically vibrating with excitement. They didn't even offer a greeting. They just marched in with a roll of pink sticky notes and a Sharpie, ready to stake their claims. I sat on the couch in the living room, hugging a throw pillow, looking down at the floor. I let them roam freely. I listened as they walked through my dining room, slapping a pink sticky note on my custom-built mahogany table. Slap. One went on the antique grandfather clock in the hall. Slap. I heard Chloe squeal from the kitchen as she claimed my professional espresso machine. "Make sure you pack this carefully, Clara," Beatrice called out from the foyer. "It's very delicate." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. They were claiming my property, items I had purchased with money I earned from years of 80-hour work weeks. "Of course, Beatrice," I called back, forcing my voice to sound tremulous and small. "Whatever you think is best." Emboldened by my submission, they moved upstairs to the master suite. I heard drawers opening, hangers scraping in the closet. They were picking through my husband's expensive suits, probably calculating their resale value. I sat there in the quiet living room, surrounded by the little pink flags of their arrogance. Every sticky note they placed was another nail in their own coffin. They were so blinded by greed and their assumption of my inferiority that they never stopped to ask for a single deed, a single receipt, or a shred of proof. They simply assumed they were entitled to everything because Greg was a man and I was just his wife. I patiently watched them tag my entire life, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The sticky note invasion wasn't enough for Beatrice. A few days later, I received a frantic, angry phone call from her. She had marched down to the local branch of our bank, armed with Greg's death certificate and her obsolete, unverified will, attempting to freeze the joint checking accounts and transfer the balances to herself. She wanted to lock me out of my own money before the 30-day eviction was even up. "How dare you?" she screeched through the phone, her voice shrill enough to shatter glass. The teller refused to give me access. They said I wasn't an authorized user on the primary accounts. "What kind of shady financial tricks are you pulling, Clara?" I held the phone away from my ear, savoring her panic. The joint account she was talking about only had about $400 in it. It was the account we used for minor household groceries. My actual wealth was shielded in private, high-yield accounts she couldn't even dream of touching. "I don't know what you mean, Beatrice." I lied smoothly. "I haven't touched anything. You're hiding his assets," she accused, her breathing heavy. "I knew you were a gold digger. You're trying to drain his legacy before I can secure it. Well, I won't stand for it. I am calling my attorney, and I am demanding a formal, legal will reading. We are doing this by the book, and you are going to be exposed for the thief you are." I had to cover the mouthpiece to stifle a laugh. She was demanding the very thing I needed to execute Marcus's plan. A formal will reading. Public. Documented. Undeniable. "If that's what you want, Beatrice," I said, injecting a fake tremor into my voice. "I'll have my lawyer reach out to arrange a meeting at his office. We can read the will there." "Good," she snapped. "And I'm bringing the family. I want everyone to see exactly what you tried to do." I hung up the phone, a massive grin spreading across my face. She had no idea she was marching straight into a slaughterhouse. I immediately called Marcus to confirm the date and time. We scheduled the reading for a Tuesday afternoon in his firm's largest conference room, a space with floor-to-ceiling windows, a massive oak table, and a state-of-the-art projection screen. Marcus told me to dress sharply and let Beatrice bring whoever she wanted. "The bigger the audience, the harder the fall," he noted dryly. I spent the weekend preparing. I packed my most expensive, tailored navy suit. I gathered every single property deed, every LLC document, and the pristine, legally binding final will we had drafted 3 years ago. I also organized a separate, red folder. This folder contained the undeniable proof of Greg's secret debts, the wire transfers to Beatrice, and most importantly, the promissory notes bearing her signature as a co-signer. Tuesday arrived with a gray, overcast sky. I walked into the law firm holding my head high, shedding the pathetic widow persona the moment I stepped out of my car. I entered the conference room to find Beatrice had indeed brought an audience. Chloe was there, of course, looking smug. But she had also invited Greg's two uncles and his condescending aunt. They were seated around the table, sipping sparkling water, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disdain. Beatrice was at the head of the table, wearing a black designer dress I knew Greg had paid for with a 24% APR credit card. She had her obsolete will placed prominently on the table in front of her. "Nice of you to finally show up, Clara," Beatrice said, checking her watch. "Let's get this over with. The estate agents are coming to appraise the house tomorrow, and I need the title cleared." I didn't say a word. I just took my seat next to Marcus, who was calmly arranging his own files. He didn't look at Beatrice. He didn't even acknowledge the extended family. He just pressed a button on his remote, lowering the projector screen at the end of the room with a quiet mechanical hum. I looked around the room at the smug faces of my in-laws, savoring the final moments of their delusions. I knew there was absolutely no escape from the trap we had just sprung. Marcus cleared his throat, silencing the whispers around the table. "Good afternoon. We are here for the formal reading of the last will and testament of Gregory Thomas Vance." Beatrice immediately slid her manila folder across the polished oak table. "I have the document right here," she announced proudly. "Dated September 2019. It clearly states that I, his mother, am the sole beneficiary of his estate, including the primary residence and all liquid assets." Marcus didn't even reach for the folder. He just looked at it over the rim of his glasses. "Yes, Mrs. Vance, I am aware of that document. I was also aware of it when it was automatically rendered legally void upon his marriage to my client, Clara, 3 years ago." Beatrice bristled, her posture stiffening. "That doesn't matter. He never wrote another one. My son wanted his family protected from gold diggers, and this document proves his intent." Marcus let out a short, dry chuckle. "Actually, Mrs. Vance, he did write another one. With me. 3 years ago." Marcus opened a thick leather binder and pulled out a pristine document with a gold-embossed seal. "This is the final, legally binding will. It was filed, notarized, and registered." The color drained slightly from Chloe's face, but Beatrice held her ground. "Fine. Read it, then. I'm sure he still left the house to me. He promised me that house." Marcus adjusted his glasses and began to read the dense legal jargon. He skipped the standard introductions and went straight to the heart of the matter. "I, Gregory Thomas Vance, being of sound mind, do hereby leave the entirety of my estate, including all personal effects, financial accounts, and tangible assets, to my legal wife, Clara Vance." The room went dead silent. The aunt coughed nervously. Beatrice slammed her hand on the table. "That's a lie. That's a forgery. He wouldn't do that." She screamed. "That house is worth over $2 million. He would never give it to her." Marcus looked at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. "Mrs. Vance, I think there is a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of the estate in question. You see, Gregory didn't leave Clara the house." I smiled coldly as Marcus pressed the button on his remote. The projector screen lit up, displaying a high-resolution scan of the property deed to the sprawling 6-bedroom estate. Marcus used a laser pointer to circle the ownership line. "As you can see here, Mrs. Vance," Marcus stated clearly, "Gregory could not leave Clara the house because Gregory did not own the house. Clara bought the property in cash, solely in her name, 14 months prior to their wedding." Beatrice stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "No," she whispered. "That's impossible. He's a senior consultant. She plays on computers." Marcus clicked to the next slide. It was the registration for my tech startup, showing an 8-figure valuation. Clara is the founder and CEO of a highly lucrative cybersecurity firm. Gregory, unfortunately, was making less than $60,000 a year after business expenses. Click. The next slide showed the car titles. The Mercedes? Clara's name. Click. The bank statements. The investment portfolios? Clara's name. Marcus leaned forward, his voice cutting through the stunned silence of the extended family. "In fact, Mrs. Vance, Every single asset you placed a pink sticky note on earlier this week legally belongs to Clara. Your son owned his wardrobe, a set of golf clubs, and a 2015 Honda Accord that he traded in years ago. There is no wealth to inherit. There is no hidden fortune. Clara funded his entire life, and by extension, she funded yours. Chloe looked like she was going to be sick. The uncles were staring at Beatrice with wide, accusing eyes. The illusion of the wealthy, successful golden boy had just been violently shattered in front of the entire family. Beatrice was physically shaking, gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. "This is a trick," she hissed, tears of humiliation finally welling in her eyes. "You manipulated him. You hid his money. I demand to see his actual financial accounts." Marcus closed the leather binder with a loud, satisfying snap. He reached for the red folder I had prepared. I watched Beatrice's ego evaporate as I prepared to deliver the absolute killing blow. Marcus opened the red folder and slid a thick stack of papers across the table toward Beatrice. "You demanded to see his financial accounts, Mrs. Vance. Be careful what you wish for." Beatrice snatched the papers, her eyes darting frantically across the pages. "As I stated," Marcus continued, his voice devoid of any sympathy, "Clara inherits all of his assets. But Gregory's estate consists almost entirely of liabilities. Massive liabilities." He clicked the projector again. Up flashed a spreadsheet detailing Greg's actual financial footprint. Credit card debt, $85,000. Unsecured personal loans, $210,000. Offshore gambling markers, $40,000. The numbers were staggering, painting a picture of total financial devastation. The uncles gasped audibly in the quiet room. Chloe backed away from the table, trying to distance herself from the radioactive fallout. "He took out these loans," Marcus explained, "to funnel money directly into your checking account, Mrs. Vance. We have the wire transfer receipts proving he funded your country club memberships and European vacations with money he borrowed at exorbitant interest rates." Beatrice was hyperventilating now, clutching the papers to her chest. "Well," she stammered, trying to regain some shred of dignity. "That's terrible for Clara. As his wife, she's responsible for his debts. I suppose she'll have to sell the house after all to pay for his mistakes." I finally spoke, my voice calm and icy. "No, Beatrice. I'm not responsible for a single dime." Marcus nodded. "Clara's assets are entirely shielded by our legal team. She didn't sign a single loan document. However," Marcus leaned in closer, "someone else did." He pointed to the documents in Beatrice's shaking hands. "If you look at the promissory notes for the largest loans, totaling over $200,000, you'll see a secondary signature on the guarantor line." Marcus pointed to the guarantor line on the loan documents in her shaking hands. "You co-signed his secret loans, Beatrice," Marcus stated coldly. I watched as the reality of her total financial ruin finally settled in. The scream that tore from Beatrice's throat was something out of a horror movie. It was a guttural, primal sound of pure, unadulterated panic. "No, no. This is a lie. I didn't sign anything," she shrieked, throwing the papers onto the floor. "He told me those were just character references for his business expansion. He lied to me." The hypocrisy was astounding. She was furious that her son had lied to her, while completely ignoring the fact that she had spent years helping him lie to me. Chloe, realizing that the money train had not just derailed but exploded, immediately turned on her mother. "You signed for his loans?" Chloe yelled, her face red. "Mom, how could you be so stupid? My name is on the lease for the apartment you pay for. Are they going to come after me?" The conference room descended into absolute chaos. The uncles were demanding explanations. Chloe was crying about her apartment, and Beatrice was slumped in her chair, weeping hysterically as the crushing weight of hundreds of thousands of dollars in high-interest debt settled onto her shoulders. She had wanted to inherit Greg's estate. Well, she got exactly what she asked for. She inherited his lies, his gambling, and his financial ruin. I stood up calmly, smoothing the front of my tailored navy suit. I gathered my pristine, original property deeds and my final will, placing them neatly back into my briefcase. I didn't feel joy exactly. The man I loved was still dead, and he had betrayed me in ways I was still struggling to comprehend. But I felt a profound sense of justice. I looked down at Beatrice, who was a sobbing, ruined mess on the floor of the conference room. You have 30 days to retrieve those pink sticky notes from my house, I said, my voice echoing clearly over her sobs. After that, I'm throwing them in the trash. I turned and walked away, leaving them to burn in the fire they built. It has been 8 months since that explosive afternoon in Marcus's office. The fallout was swift and brutal. The creditors didn't care about Beatrice's tears or her excuses about being tricked. Because she had legally co-signed those loans, they came after her assets with ruthless efficiency. Last month, her beloved country club membership was revoked due to non-payment. 2 weeks ago, she was forced to sell her own home, the home she thought was so vastly superior to mine, just to cover a fraction of the ballooning interest on Greg's debts. Chloe, suddenly cut off from her allowance, had to move in with a roommate and get a real job. As for me, the healing process has been slow, complicated, and deeply painful. Therapy has helped me untangle the grief of losing a spouse from the trauma of his profound financial betrayal. I loved an illusion, a man who wore a mask of success while digging a pit of ruin underneath our marriage. But I survived because I protected myself. If I hadn't kept my finances separate, if I hadn't insisted on that single-member LLC, Greg's secret debts would have destroyed my life, my startup, and my home. My advice to anyone, regardless of how much you trust your partner, is to know exactly where your money is. Love is beautiful, but a legally binding document is bulletproof. Never let anyone belittle your success, and never assume that the person smiling across the dinner table is telling you the whole truth. Protect your assets, establish boundaries, and never let arrogant people mistake your quiet kindness for weakness. I am currently sitting on the patio of my beautiful, debt-free estate, drinking coffee from my espresso machine. I finally feel the peace I have been searching for all along. The storm has passed, and I am the only one left standing. I survived the betrayal, and I completely reclaimed my own beautiful life.